The snow of the Ardennes, the bitter mud of the Eastern Front, the relentless wind whipping through the Italian mountains. For a World War II soldier, the battle wasn't just against the enemy. It was a constant, grueling fight against the cold. A fight that began the moment the sun went down and could last until dawn. In a war defined by rapid movement and brutal combat, survival often came down to the most basic human need, staying warm. For millions of men, sleeping wasn't a luxury or even a break from the fighting. It was a tactical operation, a disciplined routine designed to keep a body from succumbing to the elements. The stakes were impossibly high. Hypothermia could kill a man as surely as a bullet. Frostbite could render him a casualty, his limbs useless or, worse, lost forever. A body so sapped of heat that its muscles wouldn't obey or its mind couldn't focus was a liability on the front line. Every soldier, regardless of their nationality, their training, or their battlefield, shared this one terrifying, universal adversary. The American GI shivering in a shallow foxhole during the Battle of the Bulge had the same problem as the German soldier burrowed into the Russian earth. The British commando on a raiding mission in Norway faced the same life-or-death decision as the Japanese infantrymen on the snowy slopes of China. There were no warm beds, no heated barracks, no respite from the cold. A soldier's sleep was a fragile thing, a temporary escape from exhaustion that was constantly threatened by the unforgiving environment. A single lapse in judgment, forgetting to change out of wet socks, misjudging the wind, or failing to properly insulate oneself from the ground, could lead to a medical emergency or a fatal outcome. The military understood this threat. Commanders and medics knew that a fighting force was only as effective as its most exhausted and coldest man. A soldier who hadn't slept for a night was a soldier who couldn't aim his rifle. A squad whose feet were frozen couldn't march. A platoon succumbing to hypothermia couldn't hold a line. As a result, the methods of staying warm became an unofficial, but deeply ingrained, part of a soldier's training. It was knowledge passed down from seasoned veterans to fresh recruits. It was the whispered wisdom of the battlefield, born out of hard experience and grim necessity. These weren't complex engineering solutions or high-tech inventions. They were simple, pragmatic hacks, born from desperation and ingenuity. They were the kind of low-tech, high-impact solutions that could be deployed instantly, using whatever was at hand. A pine branch, a torn piece of canvas, a handful of newspapers. Everything had a purpose. A soldier's greatcoat wasn't just a uniform. It was a blanket, a ground sheet, and a windbreak all in one. His canteen wasn't just for water. It was a makeshift radiator. His socks weren't just for his feet. They were for keeping his hands warm and dry. The battlefield was a cruel teacher, and its lessons were etched into the memories and bodies of the men who survived it. A man who had seen a comrade's limbs turn black with frostbite would never forget the importance of keeping his feet dry. A man who had huddled with his platoon in a shallow trench for hours, watching the snow fall, would never take a good night's rest for granted. The psychological toll was immense as well. The constant awareness of the cold, the creeping fear of not waking up, the bone-deep ache of the freezing air, it all wore a man down. It sapped his will and eroded his spirit. This is the story of that silent, invisible battle, the battle for warmth. It's the story of the sleeping hacks, the simple, clever, and often life-saving techniques that soldiers use to stay alive on frozen ground. We'll look at these methods not as mere tips, but as a critical part of a soldier's training and a key factor in their survival. They are a testament to human resilience and ingenuity in the face of unimaginable hardship. A testament that the human body, when pushed to its limits, will find a way to endure. The most fundamental challenge a soldier faced when trying to sleep in the cold was the ground itself. Earth, especially when frozen or saturated with water, is an incredibly efficient conductor of heat. It acts like a giant, cold magnet, pulling warmth directly out of a body that's lying on it. A blanket, no matter how thick, offered little protection against this relentless, silent thief. A soldier could be bundled in multiple layers of wool and canvas, but if there wasn't a barrier between them and the frozen earth, their body heat would dissipate within minutes. This is where the first set of sleeping hacks came into play, and they all centered around one core principle: insulation. Hack number 1, the insulated barrier. This was a universal rule. taught and practiced across every freezing front of the war. A soldier's first action, after digging a foxhole or finding a place to rest, was to break contact with the cold ground. They would use any material they could find. In forested areas, this meant gathering pine boughs, fallen leaves, or even dry grass. These materials, arranged in a thick, dense layer, would create a natural air pocket between the soldier and the earth. That trapped air, a poor conductor of heat, was the crucial buffer that prevented body warmth from being siphoned away. On the less forgiving fronts, where foliage was scarce, soldiers would turn to whatever was available: newspapers, pieces of wood, even empty shell casings. In urban combat, they might use broken furniture or rubble. The material didn't matter as much as the simple act of creating that crucial air gap. Hack number 2, the buddy system. This was perhaps the most effective and primitive form of survival. When two soldiers shared a foxhole, they would sleep side by side, pressed close to one another. The combined heat from two bodies was a far more powerful defense against the cold than one body alone. This wasn't just about comfort, it was a tactical necessity. The shared warmth could elevate the ambient temperature within their small shelter by several degrees, making the difference between shivering all night and actually getting a few hours of restorative sleep. The physical contact also served a psychological purpose, providing a sense of camaraderie and security in a terrifying environment. It was a tangible reminder that they were not alone. Hack number 3, layering. The concept of layering clothing is common today, but for a soldier in World War II, it was a life or death science. They were taught to wear multiple thin layers rather than one thick one. The air pockets trapped between each layer of fabric acted as additional insulation. A typical layering system would start with a thin undershirt, followed by a heavier flannel or wool shirt, and then their uniform jacket and greatcoat. But the most critical part of this hack was the management of moisture. A soldier's worst enemy was his own sweat. If a soldier went to sleep in clothes dampened by exertion, the moisture would quickly turn to ice, causing the body's core temperature to plummet. The rule was absolute: never sleep in sweaty clothes. Soldiers would often strip down to a dry layer, or, in extreme cold, hang their wet socks and undershirts from their bodies to dry them using their own warmth. Hack number 4, the trenchcoat tarp. A soldier's greatcoat or poncho was an all-in-one survival tool. It was designed to protect him from the rain, but its true value in the cold was as an improvised ground sheet and shelter. By spreading the coat out on top of their leafy or grassy insulation layer, a soldier could create a waterproof barrier that prevented the ground's moisture from seeping into their blankets or clothes. This was crucial, as wet fabric loses its insulating properties almost instantly. If the wind was a problem, the soldier could pull the coat over his body, creating a temporary windbreak. It was an essential piece of gear that was never taken for granted, and its multi-use function was a key part of staying alive in the elements. Every fold and button of that coat was a potential lifesaver, a lesson learned the hard way on a frozen battlefield. Surviving a frozen night went far beyond simply having the right gear. It required a level of personal discipline that was as critical as any military tactic. A soldier had to be constantly vigilant, even when their body was screaming for rest. They had to fight not just the external cold, but the internal battle against exhaustion and complacency. This is where the small, meticulous details came into play, the habits and routines that, when followed religiously, could spell the difference between survival and succumbing to the cold. The most experienced soldiers understood that every single action, no matter how minor it seemed, had a purpose in the grand strategy of staying warm. Hack number 5, the hot water bottle. This was a simple, yet ingenious improvisation. After a day of marching and fighting, a soldier might get the opportunity to heat a meal or brew a hot drink. During this brief respite, a resourceful soldier would fill their metal canteen with hot water. Once full, this canteen became a portable radiator. It could be tucked inside a sleeping bag, held against the chest, or placed at the feet. The heat it radiated was enough to warm a small area and make the initial stages of falling asleep far more comfortable. It was a brief, luxurious moment of warmth that could break the chilling monotony of a sub-zero night. The heat from the canteen would last for hours, making it one of the most effective and universally used personal hacks. Hack number 6, the foot warming trick. Frostbite was a constant and terrifying threat, especially to the feet and hands, which were furthest from the body's core. A soldier's boots were his most important piece of equipment, but they were also a liability in the cold. A single step in a puddle or a moment of carelessness in the snow could leave a boot and sock frozen solid. To combat this, a soldier had to practice a strict routine. Before settling down to sleep, they would take off their boots and socks, no matter how cold they were. They would then vigorously massage their feet to restore circulation. The most crucial part was putting on a clean, dry pair of socks. A soldier always carried an extra pair for this purpose. The damp, worn socks would be tucked under their clothes to dry using their body heat. As for their boots, they couldn't be left outside to freeze. They would be brought inside the sleeping bag or under a blanket to keep them from turning into solid blocks of ice, which would be impossible to put on in the morning. This routine was a non-negotiable part of a soldier's nightly ritual, a small act of discipline that could prevent a lifelong injury. Hack number 7, the hole-in-the-middle technique. This was a clever trick for a soldier sleeping alone, without the benefit of a buddy's body heat. The goal was to create a personal microclimate. A soldier would arrange their blanket or sleeping gear in a circular shape around their body, leaving a small opening in the middle. They would then lie down and pull the edges of the blanket up and over their head, covering their face and trapping their exhaled breath. The warm, moist air would quickly fill the small space, raising the temperature. This technique was effective, but it had to be done carefully to avoid getting the inside of the blanket too damp, which would negate its insulating properties. A soldier had to balance the need for warmth with the risk of moisture buildup, and they learned through trial and error how to do it just right. Hack number 8, the pre-sleep sentry. In a team environment, soldiers had to take turns standing guard. But even during their rest periods, a good soldier never fully shut down. They knew that lying motionless for too long would cause their core temperature to drop dangerously. They would set a mental timer to wake themselves up every so often. During these brief awakenings, they would perform small physical movements, clenching their fists, wiggling their toes, and shifting their body position. These simple motions would get the blood flowing and produce a small amount of body heat. This wasn't about getting warm, but about preventing the dangerous and gradual onset of hypothermia. It was a constant fight, a low-level struggle for survival that continued even when they were trying to rest. This discipline was as much a part of their training as firing a rifle. The constant battle against the cold was not just a physical struggle, it was a psychological one. The relentless, biting cold wore a man down, slowly eroding his resolve and his ability to think clearly. A soldier who was perpetually cold was a soldier whose reaction time was slowed, whose judgment was clouded, and whose morale was broken. The most advanced rifle or the fastest tank was only as good as the man operating it, and that man needed to be sharp, focused, and ready to fight at a moment's notice. These seemingly insignificant details, the layering of socks, the placement of a canteen, the act of a simple body movement, were not just hacks. They were the fundamental tactics of cold weather endurance, passed down through the ranks and perfected through grim necessity. They were the unofficial field manual for surviving the most brutal of conditions. They were a testament to the unyielding will of the human spirit in the face of nature's most merciless forces. A man who had seen a comrade's limbs turn black with frostbite would never again take for granted the importance of keeping his feet dry. A soldier who had spent a night huddled with his platoon in a shallow trench, watching the snow fall, would understand the vital necessity of sharing body heat. The battlefield taught a brutal lesson. In a war fought on 1,000 different fronts, a soldier's discipline in the face of the elements was just as critical as his discipline in the face of the enemy. The ability to endure a frozen night and be ready to fight the next day was the ultimate test of a soldier's resilience. These routines were a form of nonverbal communication, a shared understanding of what it took to survive. A new recruit watching an old veteran meticulously massage his feet and change his socks didn't need a lecture. He saw a lesson in survival being lived out in front of him. This is the ultimate truth of a soldier's experience in the freezing cold. Their life depended on their ability to manage their own body. The military supplied the gear, but the soldier himself was responsible for using it correctly and with purpose. The success of a mission, the security of a foxhole, and the lives of the men around him all hinged on his ability to fight the cold and win. He had to be his own medic, his own strategist, and his own source of warmth. The human body is an incredible machine, but it is not immune to the elements. These stories of survival are not just tales of bravery, but of profound knowledge and self-reliance. They are a testament to the fact that even in the most desolate and terrifying conditions, the will to live and the ingenuity to find a way forward will always endure. These 8 simple hacks, born out of desperate necessity, are a timeless reminder that in a war, the battle for survival is fought not just with bullets and bombs, but with every fiber of a man's being, from his spirit to the very warmth in his veins.